There, I'd like to record a little bit about QA, also known as QA. QA is short for quality assurance. And I'd like to cover what is QA. QA is making sure that software or anything that you view online or work with in a web page in our context does as you expect it to do. Obviously, that can have a wide range of meanings. How do you do QA? QA is done by trying to break something and going through the processes that any given user would expect to go through, not just the common ones, but the ones that are not as often done, and seeing if there's any problems with that, if anything breaks, if things don't work the way that they should work. There are three types of problems or errors in QA, and I'll list them in order of their of their precedence. Sorry. The first error that you can get is an error where you literally break something. So I go here. This is a interface that I have, or a UI for processing maps. These three maps of España are real and they need to be processed, although I'm in a QA or testing database. So what I'm doing right now is not in production. As a matter of fact, if you look at the URL, the URL here, I'm actually in my local environment. So nobody's going to get hurt by the doing of this. And so let's click on here, and that pops up a new window where one can edit all the stuff that you could ever possibly imagine about that map. And this is working, and it's all working well. There's an auto save, so as I actually save, or not save, but as I type something, you'll see over here on the right hand side that that is actually showing that it's receiving the change, and it auto saves as long as there's active typing in any field that's critical every 5 to 10 seconds. And so it's constantly pushing data up to the server, and it's making it so that if I close this, this is the way I would QA that. I'm going to close that, open it up again, and it looks to me like my edits have been saved, which is good. That's what I want. If I didn't see that, that would be a bug, and I would report it back to the developer and say, hey, this is not working as I would have expected. Now, if I open this and I see a blank page, then that's a top-level error. That's when I'm breaking something. Maybe I opened maybe opening this map doesn't cause a problem, but opening this map does. That would be a top-level error where you actually see coding errors or the page is blank or something like that. So that's the highest level error, and it's the worst one that we and we want to fix that first. After that, another error is the ability to do something that is not allowed and shouldn't be allowed, and if I do allow it, can cause a critical problem. Now, most applications involve entering a value into a database. If you use Twitter, if you use Facebook, if you use Gmail, and you send anything, then you are entering something in a database somewhere. Browsing a website doesn't require entering anything into a database, at least not implicitly, or pardon me, explicitly. But using any kind of application, web application interface does. And so in the case of this map, I'm going to open this up. Oh, look at this. I've actually got a error. So this is a good example of something that happened, and I wasn't expecting it to happen. So what happens when I open it again? Same error. So it's a trappable error, which means that I can actually trap that error. I can report back to the developer, if you do this in this sequence, you'll see the same error that I see. And of course the developer is unable to replicate it, and he says, I'm sorry, I can't duplicate it, and it's maddening. So it appears to me that if I open this once, this works out and it shows that, but if I open it again, I get this error. And that's kind of unusual. I think I know what's going on. Now that would not normally happen because somebody would work on it and they would save it, but it's an edge case, so this is a good example of QA. Let's see here, and let's go ahead and let's talk about a second level error. So in this case, I can demonstrate a second level error. Now I'm not breaking the form, and I should be able to save and close this, but I'm going to deliberately do something that I know is not kosher. I'm going to remove this title. And also, I only want to do one thing. And generally on QA, you only want to do one thing. And so I'm going to click Save and Close. And it says meta title is required. And I go down to there. And let's undo that. Let's go to here. And let's go back up and try that one. Meta description is required. So this is working. Now, if by the business's rules they expected these values to be here, and we could get away without submitting them, then that is a second level error. It's a failure of error checking to catch something. Now, down here is probably not that bad, but up here, if you didn't have the title or the name or perhaps the caption of the item, that would be really bad. The skew is something that would be required. So there's different elements, and some of them are more required than others. But in any case, any form that you submit, any values that you submit, should be sanitized and should be evaluated as to making sure that they are the values that we want in the database for the element. So that's the second level error. The third level error is maybe it does what I expected it to do, but it doesn't make it clear that it just did it. So if I click Save and Close and nothing happens, it does, well, in this case it would be an error because it saves it, but it doesn't close it. But if that button just said Save, and I click Save, and then nothing really happened, that might be that is definitely unclear. So if it didn't become disabled or grayed out, or if there wasn't a notice of some kind saying that it has been saved, then that's ambiguous, or it's not clear, or the instructions are not clear. That is an example of a third level error, and they're all important, but you have to triage when you're developing code, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong. And I think a good good philosophy on QA is never be embarrassed and don't run from your errors. If you make a mistake, if you've done something wrong, own up to it and just continue right on to fix it in that order, and acknowledge that this is very complex stuff that we do. And generally developers are terrible at QA, and the reason we are terrible at QA is because we deal with so many things out there in the internet world and the software world where we have to work with things, and they all have errors. And so we're so used to figuring out how to get around things that we're really frustrated when something doesn't work the way it is expected. So we instinctively, subconsciously avoid getting into something where there's a mistake. So to sit in the chair of a QA engineer and actually look for mistakes, and having our text or our content that we just typed got lost and all those frustrations, we don't like to do that. So we consciously or subconsciously, we actually avoid it. So that's why programmers don't make good QA engineers as a rule, because we just don't like to deal with that. But that is the philosophy of QA, so you're actually trying to deliberately find an error. And so it can be frustrating, but understand the frustration is the frustration that the end user feels, who doesn't know how to do things and get around things. And what we often do is we have become so adept at that we don't even realize that we're doing it, and we know how to do something a certain way that avoids the problem. QA is just the opposite. QA is looking for the problem, it's finding it, it's stumbling into it the way that the end user would stumble into it. So these are some examples. I'm going to cover some more things on this in the next section, because I want to focus in on this company here, Maps of the Past, and QA for some of my employees to actually debug this. So I'm going to set up a checklist of how to go through and debug and to test this interface. The testing that we'll be doing will be referred to as regression testing. I want to see if anything regresses back to a former state or if something fails. So that's a bottom-up sequence where you go through every single step, where you go here and you add a map to this list, you upload it, you then assign it to yourself. You go through every single sequence from the start of the process to make sure that everything works. And the objective as a QA engineer is to make that process as fast and as thorough and as enlightening as possible so that you can find anything, plus using some judgment as to what has historically gone wrong. You can focus in on the areas where you expect there might be a problem based on what the software developer has actually done. And after working with the system or working with the developers, you can begin to know that. And the faster you can find things, the better a job you're doing as a QA engineer.